evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Our community members, students, and esteemed local legislators, thank you for being here. We're lucky enough to be joined tonight by Bill Beardsley, who served for 23 or 22? 23 years as the president of Hudson University, so he knows his way around a campus, and we're very glad to have him. He's worked across the United States, in Alaska, and in Vermont, and he's finally settled in Ellsworth, Maine. So, without much further ado, welcome Bill Beardsley.
This is great. Thank Tom for coming. I read the title of the course, which is State Politics and Environmental Policy, so I thought I'd start with environmental policy and tell you about 12 years ago, I led a workshop on sustainable forestry for the USAID, United States Aid for International Development, in the Russian Far East. We took a local forester and landowner and stuff like that and went over there. And it was out in the depths of Siberia, November, cold and all this kind of stuff. And it was a fascinating experience. And one of the things we did is we took the Baxter State Park Great Fire of 1967, where the trees had been blown all over. The park made the decision they were not going to clean them up. They were going to leave the windfall. There was worry about fire hazard, but they wouldn't change their policy. They were going to let it be natural. The wind knocked them down, they'd stay there. And lightning did strike, and a massive fire burned out of the park on the Great Northern's prime timberland. And the Great Northern people had all the equipment when it put it out and all this kind of stuff. But it raised an interesting question of and what we did is we rewrote this as a case study for the Russians, because they just were privatizing their forests across the country and had that as a debate. Then we took the spotted owl and we rewrote it to be the case study, and this is used at Harvard Business School, and used it, the case study of the spotted owl, and turned it into the Siberian tiger, which had been written up in the paper a couple days ago because several of them were starved to death in a destitute Chinese zoo. And we rewrote it on how do you decide whether you save these tigers. And the argument went like this. Some of these people came from destitute Russian villages where the villagers were starving to death. I mean, the whole economy of Russia at the time was very fragile. And you could sell the 12,000, you could sell the tiger for $20,000, $30,000 for aphrodisiacs in China, the bones of the tigers and all that kind of stuff. And so, was it better to save the Siberian tiger or to save your children? And so they were very interested. Then we got talking about the forestry referendum here in the state of Maine. And Ivan shook his head and said, I don't understand this. You guys are coming over here from the democracy, free enterprise system, and you're socializing your forest while we're privatizing ours and putting it in the hands of private individuals and companies where it should be. And it was what I call a real inversion of the whole concept. Then Elbridge Cleaves, who was a forester that was with us, he said, now what would you do with that birch tree? And the Russian forester said, they tell us in Moscow. I mean, they still are giving directions, and if they say bolt wood, it's bolt wood. If it's veneer, it's veneer. If it's firewood, it's firewood. It's pulp. What do you do with it? And Elbridge said, well, it's the free enterprise decides how it goes, the market. And they said, well, how does it work? And has anybody here ever tried to explain how the market works? How one decides how one forester is going to cut, fir or spruce or pine one way or the other. But it was a really interesting issue. And the night we left, we were sitting around a table, midnight, dark, way out in the snows of Siberia, this dacha that was just way out of nowhere. And there's all this vodka around the table, and everybody's sullen. Nobody's talking. Everybody's just as sullen as can be. And so finally, I piped up through a translator and said, I'm really disappointed, because I always thought that when Russians got together at night out in the middle of the winter, in the middle of Siberia, that they'd sit around a table and sing. And they got really angry, and they really got shouting and getting quite violent with each other. And finally, they turned around and had a translator translate back and said, not only are we going to sing, but we're going to sing for 2 hours, and we're going to sing just songs about the forest. And they were arguing over which songs to sing. Think about that. I use that because the environmental issues that we deal with today are counterintuitive. They're not always natural. Think of the Canadian lynx and why it's disappearing. You go to a biologist and they say it's because the snowshoe hare has disappeared. You go to this, then you go to another biologist and say, why is the snowshoe hare disappearing? And they said, well, because there are no thickets, no undergrowth, no briar patches for rare rabbit. They're all gone because we have sustainable forestry. We have a full canopy overhead, so we have a desert on the ground that gets no sunlight. So we've lost our rare rabbits, we've lost our Canadian lynx. So then you say to yourself, well, the solution to that is a patchwork quilt of clear cuts. Oh no. And so you begin to think of, you as students and academics, we all get these stereotypes. We look at these issues like clear cuts or the spotted owl or Russia and free enterprise. And I use those just as examples that the environmental thing is something that's really going to be inside you, and what you value and what you think is most important. So let me give you just a sweep through history really quick. Atlantic Monthly, beautiful article about how since the time of Columbus, from the Amazon to the Arctic, our forests are but an artifact of man. That virtually all of our forests are created. There's no such thing as a climax forest. There's no such thing as nature left to its own devices for over 500 years. So you begin to say to yourself, so what we're working with, and I don't mean to talk, we could be talking about the sea, we could be talking about the lakes and streams, but what we're working with as an environment around this community in Franklin County is an artifact of man. Then you go back to 1650, and these are what Thomas Cahill, a writer, he wrote about what are the hinges of history, how the Irish saved civilization because they preserved certain books, and the gift of the Jews, and the small group of people in the Middle East, and what a difference they made, and the Greeks and things like that. But you go back and look at, in 1650, the Dutch blockaded the Baltic Sea, so the British Navy couldn't go into Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia and get the white pine that they used for masts and booms. So they came to the coast of Maine. And they developed a working relationship with the settlers and colonists here. And they paid good prices for the masts and the booms and the things that were so critical for their, that was what ruled the ocean, ruled the world. But about 1700, the British Parliament began to get nervous, so they began to say, they developed a survey of the pines, and they developed a concept where the pines, they passed laws in England that said the pines no longer belong to the landowner. They don't belong to the landowner. They belong to the crown. And they had the mark of the broad arrow. And it led to a basic insurrection in the biggest war we've ever had, which isn't, I mean, our history books don't talk about this kind of stuff. But we had the White Pine Revolt that went on until the Revolution. But ask yourself this question. If there's a grandmother up in Strong that's got a 50-acre woodlot, and it's a mature woodlot, and she wants to harvest it when she gets older and maybe leave something inherited for her children. So she calls the state and says, can you help me come up and how to manage this woodlot as a mature stand? And what they do, they send up people and they go out and try to find a skidder rut or an old cellar hole, and they declare them vernal pools for a non-endangered species, and they mark out those two vernal pools, 7 acres each, and basically they've taken away your inheritance. How does that differ from the taking of 300 years ago of the crown in the trees? How does that, I'm sure people in this class have all studied, Article 5 of the, Amendment to the Constitution, which deals with no taking of land without just compensation and big discussion. So those are the kind of environmental issues that transpose and go on today, just as much as they did before.